So these two wines are pretty interesting, and they're a little bit. I think I'm going to call them a little bit mysterious. So and they're both fortified wines here from the Finger Lakes, and the Finger Lakes has a kind of a long history of making fortified wines. Prohibition, of course, put a wrench in everything in this industry in the Finger Lakes, as it did in most of the country. But if you look back at some of the wines made in the Keuka Lake Valley back in the early 1900s, the styles were pretty interesting. So anyway, let's take a taste of this white.
And what, pray tell, is the vintage on this wine?
Well, this is the 2006. We call it our 2006 legacy. It's the only legacy that we're ever going to label because it's actually a trademark name. We were kindly reminded of that after we used it. But the folks who own the trademark were kind enough to let us sell this through. So that's what we're going to do. And it's a great name. And lots of people use it. We're not the only ones. So they've had this conversation with many people, I suspect. In any case, this came, the inspiration for this wine came from experiences that I had back in the 90s. I had the fortune of doing some projects with Widmer wine cellars back in the early 90s. And at that time, they were still in full swing production. Of course, their most famous wine was that Widmer's Lake Niagara wine, which is that still, I think that brand is still out there, is it? Is that so? In any case, you need tons and tons of Niagara, thousands and thousands of tons of Niagara. But one of the other things they did was when they, in early 70s, I think 1972, they kind of restarted a program that had been, they'd done previously, decades previously, and that was this production of this sherry style wine, this cream sherry style wine. And it was done in essentially a Solera method. So on the winery in Naples, this rather large winery, you drive in and there were stacks and stacks of barrels on top of the big warehouse looking buildings, and that's where they did this Solera process. So I was visiting there and doing some tasting, and ended up having the opportunity to taste through this Solera program. And of course, it was mostly hot pressed Elvira and Niagara, and I think some Concord in there as well. But hot pressed, both for ease of production, but also to extract more stuff. We like the stuff thing, more stuff from these grapes. And my gosh, and then it was fermented and fortified and put in these barrels on the roof. And so when you tasted a wine out of these barrels, fortified wine from like that vintage or the year before, it tasted, as you might expect, really grapey and Niagara, and it was something. It was kind of delicious, but really Niagara grapey. You taste it after a couple years, and that edge would start to soften. Around 5 or 6 years, it started tasting really pretty cool. And by the time you got to maybe 10 years, most of that Niagara flavor was totally gone. And at that time, the oldest single barrel, this was a slower system, but the winemakers would kind of keep track of a few individual barrels that didn't get blended, so you could taste back and track. The barrels going back to 1972 would have been there for 20 years at that point, and they were just stunning, just gorgeous wine. So in 2006, I'm not sure exactly what the situation was, but I suspect it was because I had my tanks were full and I had a little bit of Niagara left. And I decided, what the heck, I'm going to fortify this. I'm going to put it in barrel for a while. So I did that, and I kind of forgot about it for a long time. It was after Toby arrived in 2012 that he might have said, "Hey, Dave, what's this barrel over here?" It was our Niagara, our Niagara Sherry project. So, and that was six or 7 years, almost 8 years ago. So. It stayed in that barrel through the temperature swings of the season for another few years, and we bottled this. When did we bottle it? Was it just 2 years ago that we bottled this? In 2018, I think.
I think so.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So there we have it.
At 18?
Yeah, it's almost less about a winemaker with this project as it is like being a guardian of it, uh, because it's the time scale is so long, and it's it's your job to check in every once in a while and make sure that it's good in the barrel and there's no issues and uh, what have you. But for the most part, it's much more just letting time and oxygen do their work on something you just wouldn't expect otherwise. It's a really we used to have this game where we'd have people come over and try wines with us in the cellar, and no one ever guessed what this grape was. And it just actually, I think one person didn't. It's because they knew that the question was so strange that they picked the most ridiculous thing they could think of, and they got it because of that. But
Oh. Yeah, it's interesting. Like just tasting it, so this is a non-vinifera grape in Niagara. So it's a grape that is across about a couple other grapes native to America, and typically those grapes have this like really identifiable quality on the nose that has that really grapey, like Welch's grape juice kind of artificial grape signature, and this doesn't have that. It's like all that, like you say, David, it kind of dropped away over time, and something else, really dynamic, really interesting, has taken its place.
Sometimes we refer to this as the wine formerly known as Niagara.
yeah, and, I mean, at this point, we've started up the project again. All right, there was this one barrel made in 2006. Part of the reason it was so hard to figure out what it was when I found the barrel was because that was several record-keeping systems behind where I was currently at Red Newt, so we had to find the old system that had it listed, and and it didn't have any of the identifiable characters that you would expect for Niagara, but it was so beautiful that I think maybe in the 2015 vintage, I think that's our first one, we started making one barrel of this every year, because it's such a long timeline that you really do want to kind of have it primed, right? And you want to have some supply of it ready to go. And as a convenient bookend for Bill here, at least the current iterations of it, and I'm pretty sure this would have been as well, Dave, more likely than not, is basically Blue Newt. The one that,
cool.
And basically the Blue Newt level of sugar, more or less, and just we pull off a little bit before we bottle Blue Newt, and we pull off a little bit less than we'll fill a barrel, so we can add alcohol, and so long as we remember to do it, the course is.
And do you guys leave headspace in the barrel? Do you top off, or does it just kind of sit and like set it and forget it kind of methodology?
It's a little more set it and forget it. I think we fill it full to start with, and then after 10 years, it's going to be drawn down from evaporation and us sampling it, and there'll be headspace there. When you do get to that longer tail, you need to start tasting not more frequently, but you just need to be careful it doesn't start going. Yeah, as long as it's not going volatile, you're in good shape.
So how about the second wine?
Well, I wish I had a cheese board in front of me now. I should have prepared better.
Bill, you're reading my mind, because I was just sitting here going through my database, the Finger Lakes Creameries, going, I think this would go great with that. Now, if I was just sitting in front of a campfire with a hunk of cheese in this, I'd be really happy right now.
Yeah, totally. I was trying to think too of what other wines it reminds me of, because it is kind of a one-off, and obviously there's like it's a little more sophisticated than your average cream sherry, and there are good white ports. There are not a lot of good white ports, but they exist. But it has like a little bit of like a Vinsanto-ish dimension to it. Some of the more oxidized styles. but it's really interesting. It's one of those wines that, especially if you gave it to me blind, like I would probably, spend the better part of half an hour just trying to like figure out what the hell I was dealing with.
Well, if that one was hard to figure out. And I'm not quite sure what the story of this one is. I mean, I should say, I'm not sure why the heck we did this, but we did. In fact, it was the birth of this wine, if I remember correctly. So, Kelby, what's your take on this? Why did we decide to go down the path of this beautiful fortified red wine?
I think it's a response to the story of the cream sherry in a way, right? And Dave's memories of cream sherry at Widmer. So this is, I don't know, our attempt at making that style. I don't know, Meg, you probably remember this. This was your first vintage as well. And this was, I think we were helping out a grower. Right, we had Fred Wickham had a little bit of fruit that he wanted to help us, or wanted us to help him out with, and as it turns out, it's 100-year-old Concord vines.
Cool.
Which is pretty kind of a fun little quirk, and kind of branching off of what Dave's experience had been. We decided to chase we couldn't hot press, right? We don't have a hot press. That's a particular piece of equipment, but what we could do was rip the fermentation at a really high temperature on skins and really extract all the stuff we could. Do
you like to do that with non-vinifera grapes just to break down some of the harsher tannins and stuff, or?
No, not in particular. I mean, we work with a hybrid called Noiré, and we run that pretty hot, but that's more for flavor extraction because there's some really great peppery notes to that grape that come out that way. And then the regular Niagara would just get pressed and cold fermented like any aromatic white. But yeah, with this Concord, it was very aromatic in the cellar, right? It was hot, so it was throwing out lots of fumes, and it made everything smell like Concord. And then internally, after it was pressed off. But this was basket pressed off, wasn't it, Meg? You can tell the story. This is your story to tell. I was out.
I don't know. It's my story to tell. It was I was just helping basket press for the first time ever, and we were bucketing into the basket press because everything's manual and it's a lot of fun. And James and I were just down there kind of doing it together. I think Kelby was working on probably data input at that point, I would assume, of the day.
Oh, this is when I was at Bullhorn Creek. This ties back to that story of Julia helping me out.
You were
shining down the vineyard rows. Yeah.
So we had gotten just about all of it through. There were a couple press loads of this that we were doing. And at the last one, we had been pressing, and all of a sudden there was a gigantic, very, very loud pop, like an explosion within the basket press. Somewhere along the way, a little metal spoon had been dropped into the bin and had been bucketed into the basket press and had popped the bladder. So James and I, covered in grape skins and juice from the explosion, immediately were like, I think it's okay right now. We went upstairs, we got a beer, we took a moment, and then I think Kelby saying, so this happened, please help. By the way, like messing up a piece of equipment, especially when you're still learning things, was the most terrifying day ever. I was like, oh, and there goes my time in the cellar. I'm done.
It's all over. But yeah, we ended up with this very Concordy wine that we fortified to get a little bit more heat in it. It wasn't, not naturally this alcoholic, and put it into an older American oak barrel. Cool. Where aged ever since. And much to Dave's point about tasting through the Cellar at Widmer, the first 4 or 5 years of this, we fondly referred to it as Mad Dog 2020 for its characteristics. And then after about 5 years, all that grapiness really started to drop away. This is still, it's not at the same level of aging as the legacy, but it's it's very clearly on the right trajectory now. You can kind of track it. Although we've buried it way in the stacks, so it's always a challenge for Megs to grab a sample, but it also means that we don't grab too many samples, which we are sometimes prone to doing when we want to geek out with people who come visit us.
This reminds me of one of my favorite fortified wines of all time, which is Barolo Chinato. So for the uninitiated, Barolo Chinato is a fortified wine based on the most famous Northern Italian wine, Barolo, in the world, that's fortified with like herbs and spices and stuff. And this has a little bit of that. I love Concord grapes, like raw Concord grapes above all things. They're so like spicy and, you know, grapey in like a really, you know, fun way. And, you know, I love the way that like some of the, you know, more like tawdry aspects of that flavor profile have kind of dropped off. And this has taken on this like slightly more like regal, like baking spice kind of, you know, winter by the fire, you know, chocolate fondue thing happening, which I really dig. Megs, I also feel like you should have a virtual background behind you.
Of an exploded basket press, perhaps.
I was going to say of a basket press.
Looped basket press explode.
Well, great. You know, usually we wrap these up with talking about what we're going to have for dinner to go with the wines, but I think I might just be on these thinking about dinner for the most part.
I feel like I'm thinking about dessert more than
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I coerced my significant other into buying me a bunch of fresh berries the other day. So I've actually been planning on making a custard tart topped with fruit today to go with the legacy, I think.
Yeah.
Ooh, that sounds great.
Yeah.
How about you, Kelby? You have anything planned?
I think I'm gonna go the opposite direction, which is often how fortifieds can work, and have especially this Concord one, which has some pretty bright acid. We have some, oh my goodness, what are they called? Like the Japanese shrimp chips. And I'm, you know, it never hurts to throw something against the wall and see how it turns out. But you know, we have a poster in our kitchen that says vermouth hour in Spanish, and you know, anything that's fortified and kind of taps into those herbal things, we're down to try with cheese and olives and whatever else we have snacky around. Or maybe we just like to snack a lot. I'm not sure. Unclear.
How about you, Heather? What do you think?
So with the legacy, I have some Morning Glory at home, which is produced by Crossman's up in Interlaken. It is their version of fresh cheese. So instead of it being from goat and called chef, this is actually made from cows. And I have a recipe where I infuse that with some dried apricots and drizzle it with honey. So that'll be part number 1 tonight. And then part number 2 with Concord, I actually have a really beautiful butter pecan ice cream that I'm going to drizzle a blueberry coulis over and just have it with this.
Heather, I am lamenting the fact that I'm, you know, over, you know, 6 hours away and I can't crash dinner.
You'll have to join us for harvest dinner.
So besides just oogling over Heather's evening, what do you think you're going to do with your leftovers?
So one of our regulars is, he lives in Vermont, just outside of Burlington. And he's very concerned with our welfare throughout pandemic, and just lovely dude. And he shot me an email. We've been trading emails. He asked how the restaurants are doing, because he's in politics and is a pundit of sorts. But anyway, trading emails and asked me for my address, and I sent him my address. And I figure usually when that happens, you know, I'm in a, you know, very lucky position where people want to send me bottles of wine and stuff. You know, part of me wonders where these people were in my early 20s when I actually needed the wine. But you know, for whatever reason, you know, now I get the wine and it's great. You know, I don't. So Garrett sent me basically a pandemic's worth of Vermont cheese. So like just an astounding, like a huge box. We're like more cheese than anyone should probably consume in, you know, several years, let alone, you know, a few months. And my wife and I are courageously working our way through that. So I'm excited about continuing to chip away at our Vermont, cheese allocation.
You'll have to tell us what your favorite one was with this.
Yeah.
They're all really good. I'm a total sucker for like the old cloth bound cheddar. But Vermont's a funny state in the sense that like there are like Vermont stands or proud Vermonters that will champion every local product till the day they die, which is not unlike the Finger Lakes. But the cheeses were all astoundingly good.
Okay. What do you have on the docket, Rebecca?
I don't have that much going on tonight. And so I think one of the great things for me about fortified wines is that, you can open it up and have a little sip, and then you can put that cork back in and you can save it for quite a long time before you feel like opening it up again, unlike other table wines. So I think I'm going to save mine until this weekend and, have some friends over, little cheese plate. Equally, it would be great with a banana split.
Ooh.
That's what when I taste this legacy. I just want it with bananas and nuts and chocolate and ice cream. I also think that this legacy would pair really well with some savory dishes. So I'll be curious what Kelby's experiment is like tonight.
Kelby, I like you. I always like your answers when it comes to the pairing, because I feel like you take the whole exercise and just like brave new directions that I never would have considered.
It's on its head, yeah.
We're late into pandemic times here.
We've done the whole meat and cheese thing. We've moved on to shrimp chips.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm going to copy Heather and probably sponge off Heather because as it happens, Heather's house is on my way home. So that cheese with a drizzle for that the legacy, I think that might be my future, Heather. Sorry, but this board, I have a little bit of this homemade stracciatella in the freezer that Terry made a couple of weeks ago. Just a deep, rich vanilla with dark chocolate swirls through it. Crunchy chocolate pieces. And I'd also have a little bit of this black raspberry coulis from the trees from Heather's uncles.
Yep.
Yep. And I have a little bit of that. So just straight up rich vanilla, chocolate, and black raspberry with that. What do we call it? I'm not going to call it Mad Dog. With that.
I have a name for it yet.
You get another cease and desist letter from the Mad Dog people if you.
Hellbender Plus.
We should have a name contest for that.
Good.
Cornell actually does that for new grapes too. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, with that, thanks for joining us, Bill.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you so much for having me.